Do you have somebody that you work with that has an attitude problem? Do you work with somebody who's just not getting the low-hanging fruit tasks done? Are you frustrated with somebody that works with you or for you? If your answer is yes, then this podcast is for you, because today we are talking all about people management. And this isn't your run-of-the-mill, here's how you manage your employees or contractors. This is how we as humans can manage each other to yield the results we're looking for in business. I am Melissa Franks, and I'm your on-call COO, and you are on the Opt-in podcast, where we go from surviving to thriving in business. Whether you're a business owner or you work for a business owner, this is where we're going to learn practical, tactical advice that's going to help you propel your career and business forward. This topic is one of my favorites. I could talk about people management topics maybe forever. We're not going to do that today. We're going to cover a handful of them today, because really the concept that we are going to talk about, so what we are going to lean into and I am going to give you examples with, is that people management comes down to communication. It comes down to, very specifically, the words that you choose to use and your ability to listen. When communication is effective, action is taken. When action is taken, results are achieved. And when communication fails, ultimately, the business fails. So when I said that people management wasn't a manager, employee, manager, contractor situation, I probably had you start to wonder, what exactly is she talking about? Because as far as we all know, there's actually, in the hierarchical world, a role where your full-time job is to manage the people in the organization or the environment. And I am not going to disagree with that. What I am going to challenge your thinking about is that we all of us manage people. All of us. I see it with my children. The older siblings manage the younger siblings. And you know what? Sometimes those younger siblings got to manage up to get stuff done. Just yesterday, we were in a sporting goods store, and my 11-year-old said, "Hey, we need a new basketball net." And I looked at him and I said, "Well, do you know how to replace said basketball net?" And he said, "Well, no, of course not. We'll just figure it out." So I reluctantly said, "Sure, I'll spend the $8. We'll get the net." And partially was thinking this is going to become my problem because he's 11, and all I have been told is that it's difficult to replace a net on a basketball hoop. Needless to say, we got home and it became priority number one. Now, what he knew is he couldn't do it on his own. He knew that he needed help. So he pitched to his brother assistance. And then together, they figured out how to get the old net off and the new net on. Now, my 11-year-old is not a people manager. My 11-year-old is an 11-year-old. And if you know, you know, especially as the third child. What he did know, though, is that he needed resources. He needed a ladder. He needed assistance, somebody more experienced and have a different vantage point, and honestly, a second set of hands, his brother. And he knew that if he offered something, and I don't know what that was, so I'd love to know what the payment was in this transaction. If he offered something, he would get the help that he needed and achieve the goal. And within minutes, literally within minutes, the old net was down, the new net was up, and I could hear the basketball outside. And that is how an 11-year-old managed his 13-year-old brother. We are all people managers. We manage people day in and day out. We don't even realize that we're doing it. And so that's why I am saying that this is a topic that's important for all of us to listen to. Now, if you want to manage people, if your goal professionally, or maybe you're already there, is to have a team and to spend 99% of your time encouraging and providing feedback and ensuring that the people underneath you are successful so that everybody else is successful, that is fantastic. People management is one of the things that I absolutely live to do the most. I love it. And one of the reasons that I grew my career so rapidly was so that I could get a team and I could pour everything that I had learned into them and watch them succeed. It brings me nothing more than joy. There are a lot of us, though, that don't want that. And what I want to say to all of you right now is that you don't have to have a job title or a job function that requires you to manage people. What you do need to do is recognize that in order to become successful in whatever you are doing, whether it is owning a business or it is operating inside of somebody else's, is you need to know how to manage people. Did I get you? Because I just told you that you don't have to have a job managing people. And in order to be successful, you do need to be able to manage people. It's called life, friends. It's called life. Your life is going to be real hard if you can't figure out how to manage your auto mechanic. Your life is going to be real hard if you can't figure out how to manage your healthcare professionals. Your life is going to be real hard if you can't figure out how to manage your kids and you have them. Heck, your life is going to be real hard if you can't figure out how to manage your pets and you have them. Okay, I'm done beating the dead horse. So I hope that that's compelling enough to you. Now you understand that people management is just a thing. It's a part of everybody's life. Nobody can get away from it. Maybe infants, that's it. Although I would say that they're in charge. So, they're already managing people. So what happens when we get people, fully formed adults, into a workplace? Well, ideally, we're all striving towards a common goal. We come into the workplace with a different set of expertise and a different set of knowledge, and we have different perspectives. Other language used to describe this is we also have unconscious bias. So there are things that we are carrying around with us that we don't even realize we have. Yep, that's right. Our brains are making decisions for us. They're drawing associations. They're carrying forward relational analysis, and we don't even know what's happening. And that can make the interactions with other people around us more challenging because we're drawing conclusions we don't even realize we're drawing. So what happens when we get in this environment? Things aren't perfect. What happens when we get in this environment and we find that the working style of people that we are working with is not aligned to ours? What happens when we get into this environment, we have conflict? What happens in this environment when we have misaligned goals and objectives? Well, that's when we begin to label each other as difficult to work with, uncooperative, lazy. I could go on and on and on. My thesis is that all comes down to poor communication and a misunderstanding fundamentally of who and how we work. Okay, so I'm going to give you a couple of scenarios. We're going to kind of walk through those. I have, 3 or 4 here. So I'm going to give you 4 examples of how communication solves this issue and what to do. Now, before I go any further, one of the things that I need to caution us all about, and this is just disclaimer 101, is that communication is universal. So most of the guidance that we're going to have today in this podcast is very specific to the workplace, and it can apply to any scenario. I'm just giving some examples. With that said, when we get to the place where we talk about expectations, we are going to need to have some points of clarity, because how independent contractors or freelancers are managed is incredibly different, legally speaking, than how employees are managed. And this is a make or break for your business. Your business needs to fundamentally understand employment laws and the line for which you can direct work for each of the various parties. Now, if they're an employee, you can direct their work any way you want. You can tell them what to do, what tools to use, how to work, what time to show up, all of these things. With an independent contractor, you have less flexibility to set expectations and demands. You need to spend more time talking about the results that you expect in the timeline you expect those results, and significantly less about how the work is done. So we're going to go back and forth a little bit to talk about the differences there, because one of the things that causes friction is when you have a blended workforce, when you have employees and you have contractors, because frankly, the expectations are different. For example, and I'm going to give just a very gross generalization, with employees, there could be an expectation that they're available 24/7 in case an emergency comes up. There's a question only they can answer, even if they're on vacation. With an independent contractor, that's not the expectation. The independent contractor, unless it's specified that they work after hours and on the weekends, etc., the independent contractor can decide not to respond to you on a Friday night or a Sunday afternoon. They can decide to wait until Monday. And if they're only working part-time for you, they can very seriously only respond to you in those windows of hours. And so while you have an employee that's readily available, readily accessible, and highly engaged, you will have an independent contractor potentially that isn't. And everybody's got to be cool with that. And what can happen sometimes when you have a heavily blended environment is that the employees begin to resent the fact that the independent contractors can kind of do what they want. And you, as a leader in this environment, however you show up as a leader, have an obligation to communicate and manage that. And so we're going to talk through a little bit about what you can and can't do. I do want to highlight that these blended teams, it's highly complicated. And when unconscious bias comes into play, immediately the employee starts to think that the contractor is lazy. When in fact, the contractor is like, hey, this is what I'm getting paid to do. Why aren't you respecting my time? And this can be a really sticky situation. And the reason it's sticky is because it's governed by law. This isn't governed by human elements in this case. It's literally governed by the court of law. Okay. So enough about that. We'll do a whole other podcast around independent contractors and employees because I think that dynamic and how they work is really, really important. And you as a leader or business owner, or heck, even an employee that's interacting with independent contractors needs to actually understand what the differences are. This is one of the largest exposure risks to businesses across the board. And many states these days are getting very specific with what you can and can't do with contractors, which is making it much more difficult for businesses to hire them. Okay, back to the topic at hand. So one of the things that has come up post-COVID, because there is either a hybrid working situation or a remote first situation, or there's some sort of in between, is that there's somebody that you work with, somebody on your team, somebody that works for you that is unresponsive, or you perceive to be unresponsive. And I'm going to give you hypothetical example of this. So in your organization, you have an instant messaging tool and you have email as your primary forms of communication. And you are an over communicator. You check in, you want to know how things are going. You just want to know that there's a pulse because you can't see the people in front of you. You just want to know that that green light means that they're really there and what they're working on, and you want to stay engaged. You are enthusiastic and really want to connect. And on the other side of that screen is a team member that sees the need to communicate only when they need something or something has been completed, or they need to answer somebody's very specific question. They don't see instant messaging and email as a vehicle for check-in and communication and keeping a pulse of what's going on. They trust that everybody else in the organization is doing what they need, and that when they need help, when they are finished with something and want to hand it off, when somebody has a question, it will come to them. And so they deprioritize communication channels because they're prioritizing the work product. So you are sending these check-ins and pinging along and how's it going and can I help and what's going on? And meanwhile, you have somebody that doesn't even look at those tools except for a couple of times a day because their head is down and they are working. This is something that I see often in two different arenas. Creative arenas. So creatives tend to shut everything down so that they can focus and dream and build and ideate. And technology arenas, because developers also need the same time. One could argue that they're creatives as well, where they need time to focus and build and code or problem solve, and they can't be distracted by the pings. And so what happens is if you are somebody that expects to send a message and to get a response quickly, if the person's green light is on and they're online, you're going to start to get frustrated. On the flip side, the other person is going to get annoyed because you're sending so many messages back and forth. You're perceiving that they're unresponsive. They're perceiving that you're a micromanager. Yep, a micromanager. And this can happen teammate to teammate. This can happen from manager to employee. This can happen from business owner to independent contractor. This can happen any direction at all. You end up with one side of the equation when there is a problem that somebody is unresponsive. You have one side of the equation where the person is like, I never hear from them. I'm not getting any feedback, follow-up. Things aren't getting closed. And you have the other person saying, leave me alone. I'm getting my work done. Just leave me alone. I'll get it done. I'm a professional. And this happens. That specific scenario that I'm talking about happens when the two parties are not communicating to each other, when they're unaware of each other's working styles. This is the easiest diagnosis of the unresponsive person, because all that it takes is for the two parties to communicate to each other and say like, hey, I really like to know what's going on. Part of my working style, because we're remote, is that I like to just check in a few times a day. Is that something that we could make work? And the other side of the equation, it's, hey, I need dedicated working time. It's really distracting when you are messaging me all of the time. I lose my focus and I don't create quality work. And what will happen is in that conversation, it will become very apparent that there are two different working styles. It will become very apparent that there's two different sets of needs, and those two parties will be able to come together and say like, hey, this is how we're going to resolve this. Let the person barrage all they want in the communication channels, and maybe the one that needs dedicated working time pops up twice a day to respond. Maybe they build in some sort of a system that is an alert system. So when that barrage is actually urgent, they can connect the person in their working session. Maybe it's that person says, you know what, you need to leave me alone in the morning because that's when I work the best. And then afternoon, you can hit me up all day long. As soon as they communicate, it stops becoming you're unresponsive and you're a micromanager, and it starts becoming, oh, we just work really, really differently. And we need to honor that and then find a way to work through it. Now, there are some instances where it's not a working style situation and the person just doesn't respond. And in that case, that's again where you go back and have communication and say, this is my expectation. When it's working hours, I expect you to respond to an instant message within an hour of me sending it. When it's working hours, I expect a response to an email within 4 hours. Within working hours is what I expect. If it's not that this person has a system and process that's misaligned to yours, and that's why there isn't a response coming back, and it literally is just like they're not responding to you, which happens, and it's a thing, then you need to have a very clear conversation around expectations. Now, this is important because when you have employees, you're going to want to set those expectations around what their generally understood working structure and time is. When you have a contractor, this is something you can actually put into the contract language. This is where you can say, responds to emails within 24 hours. When they work from us from 12 to 4, they need to be able to respond to our instant messages within 30 minutes of receipt. You can say whatever you want. For a contractor, you can actually get super, super specific because you have a contract in place and you're able to do that. And then once you set expectations, you have to provide feedback. So this is not a once and done sort of situation. You can't say, this is what I expect you to do, and then just it's going to be perfect. Because you're asking for a behavior change. You're actually asking the person on the other side of the equation to do something differently. And so that requires you to provide feedback. And the more frequent feedback you can, where you're reinforcing the right behaviors and you're correcting the wrong behaviors, the faster you'll see the behavior change. So in a situation where the person is actually very unresponsive and it's a problem because you can't move the business forward, what you want to do when you communicate the expectations is you want to communicate the payoff. So when you meet these expectations, it means when you answer my questions faster, it means that I can close sales faster. And when I close sales faster, it means we have more revenue in the company. And we want more revenue in the company, y'all get paid more. When you can paint the picture of why it's so important to meet the expectation based on what is in it for them, you're going to see a behavior shift, and you have to reiterate it over and over and over and over again. You have to use that exact same example over and over and over again. When you answer my questions faster, it means I close sales faster. And when I close sales faster, then this happens for you. This is how it benefits you to close sales faster. Aside from me not being irritating to you, you actually get a real life benefit from this. Don't you want that? Isn't that what we all want? And then before you know it, the behavior changes because, yes, they want the payoff. Now, you've got to follow through. So if you tell them that by them answering your questions faster, you're closing more sales faster, and when you close sales faster, eventually everybody's income is going to increase, their income better increase. Because if you are just giving false promises away, you know it's going to happen, they're going to leave. So you need to set expectations. You need to paint the picture of what the benefit to them is when the expectations are reached. And then whatever that benefit is, you need to ensure on the back end that it's realized. And that is how you change an unresponsive person to being a responsive person. Quite frankly, that is the recipe for getting any sort of behavior change that you want in an environment. And if the person doesn't comply, if the person doesn't adjust and shift over time, then that's when you make a change. You need to give it time. This is like steering a cruise ship. These could potentially be, depending on how long the person's been in the workforce, very, very ingrained behaviors, and it's going to take time to change. As long as they have an aptitude for change and they're open to feedback and they're making micro adjustments, you know you're on the right track. If instead they tell you, well, that's not going to work for me and I'm not going to do that in the end, and then they show you over time with their behavior they're not going to change, then it may be time to make a change yourself. But all of this comes back to communication. So you need to set expectations. You have to use your words. You need to be able to paint what's in it for them by being able to meet those expectations. You have to use your words. And then when the behavior kind of slides back and isn't meeting expectations, you have to use your words again and give feedback. Communication is at the crux of transforming the appearance of an unresponsive team member into a responsive one. Another example is somebody that has an attitude problem and everybody has said is difficult to work with. I love this one because there are some people with an attitude problem. There are some people that are cranky and gruff, and that's them. So there are two diversions here. One is you had an employee and they're amazing and everybody loved them, and then all of a sudden, over time, they become hard to work with. Okay, that is a very different situation than you brought somebody in and they were always bristly. They were always a challenge to work with. They were always hard to communicate with. They were always super abrupt and gruff, and like people didn't want to work with them from the jump. These are two very different situations. Both of them, again, have the same diagnosis and the same protocol for treatment. On the one side, everybody enjoyed working with the team member, and now nobody does. That is, you got to sit down and have a conversation immediately. And this is not you're being a big jerk. This is, hey, what's going on with you? I'm really worried. Can we talk a little bit about what's happening? We're noticing that you're short-tempered and you're easy to blow up and you're storming out of meetings, and that's just not like you. And it's been like that for the last few months. What's going on? How can I help? What's going on? Talk to me. And then let them talk. You have to be open to hearing whatever it says. It could be that the person's having a significant issue in their personal life. Maybe they have a sick family member, or they're going through a divorce, or something else has happened that they can't shake. It could be that there's another toxic employee on the team and you didn't know. It could be that you're doing something that's bothering them. It could be that you made a promise for a payoff and you didn't follow through. It could be anything. When there is a behavior change like that, the very best thing you can do is be a human and sit down human to human, and with genuine care and concern for the person across from you, find out what's going on. it's very possible you're not going to be able to fix the problem, especially if it's something happening in their personal life. However, being able to get it out on the table, to understand the circumstance, and then work together to figure out how you can de-stress the environment for which they're in while they're with you will relieve that pressure. It will take that employee from being like a persona non grata to somebody that people are willing to work with again. You can absolutely also take this approach with contractors, because at the end of the day, this is a human to human conversation. This isn't a transactional in nature. We are all humans at the end of the day. And if you notice that something has really, really changed with somebody, it's really your obligation to check in and say, hey, what's going on? Now, on the other side, you brought somebody in and they were gruff and difficult to be with. Day one, from the jump. And you knew it. You thought they might be a little bit bristly. And the team revolted. They came to you and they said, no way, no how, no sir. Not doing it. No ma'am, not doing it. This is a little more problematic because from day one, the person had a challenge that maybe was insurmountable. This is where those like deep embedded tracks become really important. So likely if you hired somebody who had some characteristics or very quickly showed some characteristics that are misaligned to the environment for which everybody else operates in, it's because they had some sort of unique skill that you needed to get from the market and you needed it. And that means they have leverage. And the worst possible thing that you can have in a situation like this is to have them have leverage. So again, this really comes down to the same tactics that we talked about earlier, which is you need to set expectations. So you need to set the person down and you need to have a conversation. And now this can happen, I should say, not just in manager, team member, hierarchical relationships. This can be team member to team member. You guys may be sitting side by side and have to work together a ton. And the demeanor and the language and the tone that comes back to you is something that is not going to fly with you. So either way, whether it's a reporting structure or not, these tactics apply. The first thing that you do is you have a conversation. And you have a conversation not where you normally work, not in a public place. Ideally, you're on a walk. There is a significant amount of science that says that if you're able to be walking side by side where you're not needing to stare at each other and have a difficult conversation, the person next to you who you're having the conversation with will actually open up further. There's a ton of science about why getting up and walking during those conversations is the best thing to do. Strong advocate for that. Strong advocate for one-on-ones walking, unless you actually have to like look and show stuff. But anyways, that's neither here nor there. You need to have a conversation immediately. And you need to do so when you are detached emotionally from the outcome of the conversation. Because it's likely that the first round won't go the way that you want. So you get the party to agree to have a conversation with you. And then what you're going to talk about is their behavior. You're not going to talk about them. You're not going to say you're an angry person. What you are going to say is your tone when you're talking to me makes me feel like I'm in trouble. Or you're going to say your tone when you're talking to me makes me feel like you don't want to talk to me. Or you're going to say your volume when we're in stressful situations gets really, really high and it makes me uncomfortable. And that's how you're going to have the conversation. You're not going to say, you're a yeller, or you need to stop slamming your hand on the table. I mean, of course, they need to stop slamming their hand on the table. Or you're just rude. Don't say any of those things. You want to talk about what you've observed and how you've perceived it. And then when you do that, you want to be able to give your observations and just say, like, in order for us to be able to work better, I really want to I really want to not feel that way. How can we make that happen? And after you tell them what you observed, you want to give time, you want to give them room, you want to give them space. That's why I'm such a fan of walking during these conversations to explain. Likely what you're going to hear the first go around is, that's just how I am. I can't change it. That's how I am. So what you want to do too is come forward with suggestions and come, kind of with some explanations of what sort of communication pattern or word choice you would enjoy or you would like presented to you. I think it really kind of depends on how the conversation goes, but this isn't a once and done conversation. What you want to do is you want to be able to provide the feedback. You want to be able to let them respond. And then based on how they respond, you decide if you want to develop next steps together or not. And maybe it is that very first conversation. It's just like, I just wanted to share with you how I was feeling. And I really appreciate your time. And then you see what happens. Because sometimes just getting it out of yourself de-stresses you, decouples you from your emotional response. And sometimes they take it and process it and you see some behavior change. Now, if that first conversation has happened and nothing changes, then you go in for another one. And you just say, hey, we talked the last time and I'm still picking up these vibes from you. And it's making me really uncomfortable. And I'd like for us to work better together. Can we discuss a way to do that? And then if that doesn't work and things are still really, really bad, that's when we have to make some decisions about whether or not it's the right thing for the business. Now, with that said, if it's two humans that are having this problem and the rest of the organization doesn't see this person as difficult or gruff or rude or etc., you've got a conflict between the two people, and whoever is the leader in that space needs to go solve that. If the entire organization, which is what I opened with, all perceive the individual the same way, and there have been multiple attempts made to, kind of knock down the tough exterior and figure out a way to collectively work together in a more favorable light, and the difficult person is unwilling to modify their behavior, then this is where you have to make a decision. Is that person more important than the rest of the team? Because what will happen is by you allowing that behavior to continue to occur, you, the leader, it means that you're saying that behavior is okay. So what will happen is the people that disagree with that, they'll start to leave. They'll go find jobs elsewhere. And if they don't find jobs elsewhere, they're going to start behaving that way. And so instead of having one on a team of many behaving like that, you're now going to have a team of many behaving like that, and maybe a team of one or two that are behaving the old way. And the last thing that you want is one toxic person to completely pollute the rest of the population. So this is a problem you have to resolve as soon as possible. And I understand, I get it. There are some scarce resources out there where sometimes you have to hire whoever you can get. So in that case, in the case where you need the resource, you need their skills, there isn't another solution, they've got to stay. You bubble wrap them. You, the leader, become the gatekeeper between them and everybody else. It is a massive amount of overhead, but you either figure out a way to insert yourself in between so you're a buffer, or you find somebody that actually likes the gruff person and can operate as the buffer. But either way, there is a buffer drawn, because there are going to be some circumstances where that specialized technology developer or that specialized creative or that specialized whomever is 1 in a million. And you need their 1 in a million skills, and there isn't another choice. And so then what you have an obligation to do, because you're a responsible leader, is protect the tribe. And you do that by creating a perimeter around them and having somebody guard the perimeter and be the communication vehicle back and forth. I, for many years in my career, was the buffer. I, for many years of my career, was the one that guarded the perimeter. Successfully. This is a completely common practice in the technology world. You take one person that can speak with both camps and you sidle them in the middle and you become the translator. They never have to interact with each other except if the buffer is there, and the buffer ensures that everything is diffused and goes according to plan. I advanced my career because I had an innate ability to communicate between surly, gruff technology professionals and doe-eyed business people. The buffers exist in your organization now. If you have somebody with skills you can't let go, who's toxic to the organization, you find the person that can be the buffer and you implement it. All right, and then the last one is, what do you do? I love this. What do you do with the person that threatens to leave all the time? That knows they have leverage. They know that it would cripple your business if they left. What do you do? Well, you talk to them. And you come up with a game plan for them to be less valuable. Oh, I know, I said it. Okay, so as I said, all this comes down to communication. So when you have somebody that like, it's annual review time and you give them a raise and they don't like the raise and they're like, I have this other job opportunity. Like, if I don't get another $10,000, I'm just going to go take that. And you know, it's going to kill your business. And you give them the $10,000 the one time. What you teach them is just like a kid with a lollipop, that if they break you down long enough, they'll get what they want. And so sure enough, it might not happen next year, but it'll happen the following year. And they'll take longer to decide. So they'll come back and they'll say, I have 2 job opportunities on the table and one's here and one's there. And I think I'm just going to go. I'm just going to cut my losses. Thank you so much for the experience, whatever. And then eventually you cave and you give them what you need because you didn't learn from the last lesson. You just did it. So here's what I'm going to say is the first time that comes up, even if you want to fulfill whatever their request is and you're able to do so, the first time that comes up, what you need to do is be very direct and say, I absolutely value your expertise and your tenure with the business. I value what you do for this company. And also, we are a partnership. And as a partnership, we need transparency and trust. And I came to you with what the business could reasonably afford, in this example, as your pay increase. And this conversation feels like you're threatening me. It makes me uncomfortable. And it concerns me because we have a trusting, respectful relationship, and I don't want to see that, continue into the future. And then let them respond. Because what you want to be able to do is speak very quickly and at the moment around how the behavior is being perceived. Because it is a threat. And it is strategic and it is calculated. Because if they really just wanted more money or felt that they were more value to the company than they were being compensated for, they would just have a conversation with you. They wouldn't tee it up and time it and have a job offer in the wings. They would just have a conversation with you. However that is resolved in the first conversation, that's your call to action. And your call to action immediately is that they have leverage, and it's leverage you don't want them to have. And you need to find a way to make them no longer indispensable. This is your call to action. If they are the only social media coordinator on your team and your social media would completely die on the vine and it would take a year to get somebody to understand the brand, you go hire interns. You go find backup. You go figure out how to solve the problem. You figure out how to make them less critical. Because shame on me once, right? I knew you were indispensable. I knew I put you in that position, and shame on me because now I'm going to pay you even though I don't want to, and I'm going to go through with this scheme because you're right. I can't lose you right now. But we're not going to do a shame on me again when this happens again. We're going to ensure that for your function and all of the other functions in the business, you don't have this leverage. You just don't. Now, the fact of the matter is that people that work inside of your business are always going to have some sort of leverage. They're either going to have relationship leverage or skill set leverage. There will always be some sort of leverage. But what's important is to make them critical, but not indispensable. And so if you have an organization that is threatening you and it's happening over and over and over again, it's because you're leaning into the threats and you're complying. And you actually need to look at your greater model, whether it's in your team or your business, and say, what do I need to adjust? Why do they have this leverage that I don't want them to have? And what actions do I need to take as the people manager, as the business owner, as the whatever, to adjust that so they no longer have the leverage? Once they lose the leverage, it makes decision making really easy for you because you're making decisions in light of the business. You're actually able to say, does this make sense? Does giving that pay raise make sense in light of the overall business structure? And your answer may be no, and they may end up leaving, but it's okay because they're not going to cripple you when they do. You may be really upset about it. It may hurt. The business won't suffer. When somebody threatens to leave, when they tell you they've got other job offers, when all of that's happening, it's because they know that they have leverage and they want something out of you. And what you have to ask yourself is, if those are the tactics they're employing, do you want them working for you in the first place? Because if they can't come forward to you transparently and ask for what they want, what else are they hiding? That's what I said. What else are they hiding? You see, when people show you who they are, you believe them. And an employee or a contractor that's going to lodge threats and use leverage to get what they want is a behavior that you need to look closely at and determine if it's a behavior and the sort of person that you really want in your business. So we went through, I think, 3 examples of how to manage people and what to do. And it all comes down to communication. It all comes down to you having a conversation and, when necessary, dispelling beliefs and misperceptions, setting expectations, providing feedback, rinse and repeat, rinse and repeat. The more you are in communication, the more that you spend time to understand, the more time that you communicate what you need, why, and what the payoff is, the better your working environment is going to be. Whether you are a team member to team member, or you are a manager to employee, or manager to independent contractor, all of these scenarios highlight the exact same process. You communicate to understand. You listen. And then, when necessary, you set clear expectations that are tied to what's in it for them and a payoff. And then you provide feedback as necessary. This is how it happens the world over. I hope that this was helpful for you today. Go out there, manage some people, be it your small children or your pets or your teammates or your employees or your contractors or your partners or your family members or whomever it may be. These tactics translate to every single area of your life. The best way to support this podcast is to rate, review, and subscribe. And if you are watching this on YouTube, thank you so much. Have a wonderful day, and please know you are strong, you are capable, you are wise, and I believe in you.